Hello, this is the video on challenging concepts on the muscle tissue, the second part, chapter 9 of the Marriott textbook. So we're going to start our conversation with the energy of contraction. So we require about 600 trillion ATPs a second. A little bit is stored, but most of it has to be made. So there are three ways in which ATP is created, regenerated in our muscle cells. One is direct phosphorylation. So phosphorylation is to add phosphate. So we will add a phosphate from creatine phosphate. So this phosphate gets transferred to ADP, which becomes ATP. The second method is the anaerobic pathway, where glucose is broken down to pyruvic acid, and when in the absence of oxygen it becomes lactic acid. We generate two ATPs per glucose molecule this way. The next is the aerobic respiration. It's a multi-step process which also involves mitochondria, and this only happens during the presence of oxygen, and it yields about 32 ATP molecules in total. This results in the complete breakdown of glucose, and we give off carbon dioxide and water. Next, we're going to talk about muscle control and contraction. So first and foremost, we'll just introduce the motor unit. A motor unit is one motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it stimulates. So each motor neuron only stimulates a few of the muscle fibers found within the muscle, and when they do, when an impulse travels along the motor neuron, it innervates all of those muscle fibers, and those muscle fibers all contract as one unit. So how can we change contraction force? If we increase the number of muscle fibers in a motor unit, or we choose a motor unit with larger muscle fibers, or more number rather, we will increase force. Then by increasing the number of active motor units, what that means is we're going to send impulse in multiple motor neurons. So if you send it in multiple motor neurons, whichever muscle fibers, how many ever they innervate, will be all contracting at the same time. Then size of the muscle fiber, hopefully you recognize this as the larger the muscle's fiber, the cell, the larger the force of contraction. Okay, and then type will go over this. There are three main types classified in two ways, and then we'll talk about those, how those affect what kind of contraction can be achieved and what they're most suitable for. Frequency of stimulation, we'll talk about that. One versus incomplete tetanus versus complete tetanus. And then resting length of muscle fiber. If we can increase the length slightly, so you stretch it slightly, so about instead of 100% being the resting, you go slightly above 110% in length, and then you contract. It also has that spring effect of that extended part as well, so that will also increase the force of contraction. So first let's look at one single contraction. So it's called a twitch. You may have experienced it in your eye or other parts of your body where just a single twitch, you can actually visualize it very nicely. So myogram is a graph that depicts the tension. So electromyogram is a measure of the tension created in the muscle. Tension is a force that's created. Single jerky contraction is called a twitch. It has three components, or three phases if you will. Latent period, this is the time that's required for the signal to travel from the motor neuron to spread throughout the sarcolemma, and then the contraction begins. So basically activation at the neuromuscular junction and start of excitation contraction coupling, right, as part of our previous conversation. Then the period of contraction, this is when the force or the tension is increasing. Okay, the muscle fiber shortens because sarcomeres are shortening, because the myosin and actin overlap increases. And then we have period of relaxation. Now the tension is decreasing over time, right? So myosin and actin heads detach, sarcomere returns to its initial length. Next, we're going to talk about summation when we have multiple stimuli. The previous page talked about a single stimulus producing a single twitch. Here we'll talk about summation. So summation is when we have stimulus that arrives before relaxation has occurred. So we have the first stimulus that caused the latent period, of course, and then contraction. We have relaxation starting, but a second stimulus comes in. So it does not get to fully relax. So it goes the tension increases, right? So this is called a unfused because you can see a sawtooth kind of appearance. Okay, and then fused tetanus is when the stimulus strength frequency is faster, so more stimuli are sent. Okay, so even the second stimulus arrives even before the start of relaxation has occurred. Okay, and then we go on till maximum tension can be produced by that muscle. Okay, and then we have and it plateaus out. Next, we're going to talk about motor unit recruitment. So this is the process of increasing the number of active motor units. So you may have noticed this. Sometimes you go to pick up something, you haven't given it enough, or you haven't created enough tension, contraction that it moves. So you just send in, you kind of, we would say, work harder, and then it moves. So what you have done is you have recruited more motor units. Okay, so more fibers, more motor neurons have been stimulated. So why do we have variations in motor units? So we have some areas, we have smaller motor units. They give us greater precision. This is like our facial muscles, the muscles which supply our hand, right? So more precision, but the force is less. Then we have areas, we have larger motor units, so more muscle fibers are innervated by single motor neurons, right? So here the precision unfortunately goes down, but we create we can get a larger force, right? So our leg muscles, for example, our shoulder muscles will have larger motor units. Here is a pictorial view of motor unit recruitment. This is a picture showing the muscle fiber with these little circles inside it, kind of showing the motor units themselves. So we send a stimulus. First we'll send subthreshold stimulus, so we do not initiate. So the darker red will be when those muscle fibers are contracting, right? So there's no muscle fibers contracting, so no tension is produced. Then once we reach threshold, we will have muscle fibers that are innervated, okay, and we will produce a tension. We keep increasing the stimulus voltage, the stimulus strength. We're going to have more motor neurons being stimulated, or more muscle fibers being stimulated, so more motor units are being recruited, right? So, and then there will be a maximum when we have recruited all of those motor units. So sending stimulus strength higher than that will not yield more tension. So you can see an increase, and then it reaches maximum when all of the muscle fibers within that muscle as an organ have been stimulated. Okay, so a couple of terms again, just to make sure we understand muscle tension versus load. Muscle tension is the force created by the contracting muscle, while load is the object, the force of the object that's being moved. So imagine you carried a water bottle up and down, then the force created by your biceps brachii will be the muscle tension, while the weight of the water bottle will be the load. So we have two methods by which, or two terminologies and two ways we need to think about in terms of muscle contraction. We have something called isometric and isotonic. You may have heard of isotonic, or you may recall it with the osmosis conversation. there the tonicity was reference to salt content, or more precisely the solute content. Here it's reference to tension. Okay, so isometric, metric means some sort of a measure. Here it's talking about the length, so there's no shortening of the muscle, but we still produce a muscle tension. This is when we are trying to increase a load that's heavier. So if I was trying to lift a 3-ton truck, or even a 1-ton truck, I probably will not be able to move it, right? But believe me, there will be force exerted by my muscles, but there was no shortening, right? It stays still. So this happens when the muscle tension does not exceed the load, so the load is bigger. While isotonic, we are having a smooth contraction, right? So it's shortening, but we do not change the tension. So if you have smooth movement of an object, right, without changing the velocity of the movement, we will have isotonic. Then concentric and eccentric. So concentric is the primary action. So for example, you lift an object, roughly a heavy object, say a 10-pound weight. You did biceps curls, right? You perform flexion. Biceps brachii, of course, is contracting, right? But when we extend at the elbow with that weight, we still are having contraction in the biceps brachii. It's going to be less, but it's still contracting. So it's in the opposing direction, right? So not the prominent contraction. So here for biceps brachii, the eccentric contraction will occur during extension at the elbow, while concentric will happen during flexion of the elbow. Okay, so that's the difference there. So here's a pictorial view of isotonic. Isotonic means tension is the same, so length changes, but our tension does not. So we're moving at a constant velocity. Isometric, the metric here is the length, so length does not change. We're still causing a tension in the muscle, we're still creating tension, but the load is not moved. Okay, next one is muscle tone. Okay, different from muscle tension, this is tone. This is when we have contraction, so partial contraction of muscle which does not produce movement. Okay, so there is still some firmness in the muscle. Skeletal muscles, we have a constant muscle tone. For example, in the muscles that we use for posture, your neck muscles, your back muscles, right? Our neck and back muscles. Smooth muscles, we have a similar thing happening in our hollow tubes, say gastric, your stomach, our stomach, for example. There are gastric juices. They can create a pressure inside. They will cause a tension on the walls of our muscle, walls of the stomach, but stomach will partially contract, which helps to maintain some firmness, which prevents them to kind of burst open. Similarly, blood vessels, blood pressure is pressure exerted by the blood on the blood vessels, so they will also remain partially contracted. I also wanted to take just a quick second just to introduce a term, atrophy. Atrophy happens to muscles which are not being stimulated, right? So you may see a wheelchair user, their muscles, especially of their legs, will have possibly atrophy because it has not been stimulated. So let's talk about those types of muscle fibers. So classified two ways: speed of contraction and major pathway for ATP production. So ATP production can be either aerobic, that's going to be oxidative, so think about oxygen, and then glycolytic, which is when oxygen's not required. And then the speed of contraction is how rapidly ATP can be broken down, right? So fast or slow. So using these two methods, we have three types of fibers. We have slow oxidative, fast oxidative, and fast glycolytic. So slow oxidative we use for posture as well as marathon running, okay, while fast oxidative we use for walking and sprinting. Fast glycolytic is for when we need to create a tension that does not need to last more than a second, right? So hitting a baseball, throwing a ball, all those quick, very quick, needing quite a large amount of tension in a very short period of time, we'll use fast glycolytic fibers. And we have these fibers spread throughout our muscles. Depending on the way we train them, we can change some of these, right? So depending on what your outcome, what your aim is. So talking about training, we have two distinct types of training. We have aerobic and then we have resistance training. So aerobic is all about endurance, right? So marathon runners will perform aerobic endurance training, okay? So their muscles will increase, blood capillaries to the muscles will increase, mitochondria will increase, myoglobin will increase. So myoglobin is the oxygen storage within muscle cells, right? So here, if you think about white meat, dark meat, right? Here it's where we have dark meat, right? So aerobic, slow oxidative fibers will have a richer red blood cell or myoglobin and mitochondria content as well as blood, okay? So results in great endurance, strength, as well as resistance to fatigue, okay? Whereas resistance training, that's considered also anaerobic training. Here the focus is to build muscle, which gives us the highest strength within a short period of time, right? So high tension created in short periods. So for bodybuilders, weightlifters, they will use resistance training. So muscle hypertrophy, that's what happens to our muscle cells when we use resistance training. So the cells, the number of cells in our muscles does not increase, it's the cell size themselves that will increase, right? So here we also have increased mitochondria, but myofilaments, so actin, myosin, so thick thin filaments will increase. Glycogen storage will increase because this produces a lot of heat. We'll also have connective tissue that increases around this to reduce to take away that heat. Whenever we perform resistance training, we always have to think about overload principle. So we always, once we have gotten accustomed to a certain weight that we are lifting, pushing, whatever exercise we're performing, we increase it by a little, okay? So we are promoting increased strength and endurance by forcing the muscle to work a little bit more harder so they will adapt to this increased demands, okay? Overuse injury is when we do not allow time for those muscles to rest. We need to give the muscles time to rest and rebuild and build stronger, right? So ideally what you want to do is you want to give a day of rest. So you can, if you want to go to the gym every day, we can. We just have to work on different muscles on different days. So giving each muscle at least a day in between to rest. And it's also important to work in opposing pairs. What that means is those antagonistic pairs. Biceps brachii, great if you do some exercises like the curls to increase that mass. We should not forget to work on our triceps brachii as well, right? So we need to work on those as well. I hope you found this video useful. I will catch you in another video. Have a great day, everyone.